Hi, this is a comment video for GBN's 3 videos on instrumental music, and they stress a cappella music for need no command, but I stress that we need a prohibition on music because of the commands and of everyone in the world using them. I want to go over the comments I have versus the comments they make to try to prove a cappella singing is the only and it's not commanded. A cappella singing is not commanded, but for singing and without instruments that they believe. Um, I wanted to go over all the points. So BJ, he makes quotes from the founding fathers of Methodist and Baptist and other religions. They hated instruments and they considered them an abomination. Well, the comment I have is that they also sang in a mono chant. Jesus is the Lord, the Savior, everything. And they didn't try to sing parts. They felt that was sinful too. They hated the melodies. And BJ says, make the melody on your heart, and that's where it's supposed to be made. Well, you first need a guitar, a music, like it's why I showed my guitar. You first need a music to make the melody, and then you have the melody, because pre-existing world, all the way to Cain's grandchildren are the ones that founded music. I want to go over that. That perspective. Cain's Limelech was the father of these children, and one, it says he was the father of such that handled harps and organs. And this is we're talking about Cain's grandchildren here. And the other one was Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificial of brass and iron. And so they said that if Cain be avenged sevenfold, we be avenged 70 and 70. So instruments were already here in order to come to this idea that God hates instruments. And to have melody, you have to have had the instruments, because they were here from Cain's grandchildren. And it says that if you are to slay them, this is figuratively, that because Cain said everyone would slay him. There's no way he could be slayed hundreds of times physically. So he was talking about a figurative slaying. And if you want to slay people that use instruments, you've got 70 times 7, sevenfold coming upon you. 7 times 70. So that's what I have to say about the melody and how that is. It was not always made by chanting. Melodies were not. And so that's what I have to say to those founding fathers of Methodist and Baptist and whatnot. The other point is Mike Hickson makes a point in both videos he's in that music kind of went out of existence from the church's establishment until 670 AD, and he believes this wholeheartedly. Well, there is some truth to that, because what happened is you have the prophecies, Matthew 24:2, Mark 13:2, Luke 21:6, that say not one stone will be left that's not thrown down. And then Luke 19:43-44, in these days shall come, thine enemies shall compass around thee, build a trench around thee, compassed around thee on every side. They shall not leave thee one stone upon another. Now that's what happened to Judaism. And they came in, they stole the instruments out of the temple, and they stole the gold out of the temple. They compassed around them and on every side, and they did this. This is a fact of what happened to Judaism. The instruments got stolen, okay? So that's what happened with instruments being found in the temple worship and whatnot. They had to reestablish Judaism without the Levitical priesthood, because they lost their records of family records. And then you have in the New Testament, the new church, the Church of Christ, that he had his body, that was the church's meeting in all the different churches. those churches became dismembered as well. It says, Matthew 7:15, false prophets shall come in as sheep, but inwardly ravening wolves. Matthew 10:16, I send you as sheep among the wolves. And then Acts 20:29, after my departure shall grievous wolves come in, not sparing the flock. So that's what happened with instruments. They came in and they didn't spare the flock. They disassembled these churches. So you cannot say your commentaries go back to the original church, because you see there for 700 years there's no record of a church. There's no record of instruments being used in a church to where you can just say, oh, instruments were obliterated. No, they were still being used in worships and tribes and places. They've always beat drums in the jungles, and so they've always used these instruments. Noah is an example of God's specificness, that the church tries to say, oh, so he specifically only would have commanded us to sing with instruments. Well, they bring that up, and they bring up the Levitical priesthood, and the Kohaths were the only ones to carry the ark. Well, these are the ones that God specified to do this. Only one group of people. And this is not even really worship, because you don't just tell one person to worship and let everybody else just sit back and not do anything. And so you have this example, but it's also flawed in the fact that the other tribes of Israel did not offer sacrifices and weren't making it a habit to do all the ritual sacrifices, and everyone in the world was not doing that. But everyone in the world is doing instruments, and so you have to put a prohibition on it, especially since there's a prohibition on burnt sacrifices in Hebrews 10. It's a prohibition on burnt sacrifices that is what the church is considering their worship, and it says that once purged you should have no more conscience for sin, but you do. And then it says that the sacrifice is a reminder. And then it says it's not possible by the blood of bulls and goats to remove sin. But then it goes in detail about Jesus and how his one sacrifice purged us from all sin. And so there you have it, the debunked of sacrifices, and the fact that there's thousands of people using instruments. Not no of the tribes of Israel were designated until the Levitical priesthood was. And you find the commandments for sacrifices there in the early books of the Bible. You find those sacrifices and the commandments, not in Psalms. You do not find sacrifices in Psalms. I'm going to go over that right now, because in the Psalms, you have Psalms 46, you don't have commandments. And you have the opposite. You have 40 verse 6, you have sacrifices and burnt offerings thou didst not desire, okay? And burnt offerings and sin offerings hast thou not required. And then in 51, 16 and 17, thou desirest not sacrifices, or else I would have given them. And then thou delightest not in burnt offerings. And then the sacrifices of God are a broken and a contrite heart. So you find that in the sacrifice verses. You also have sacrifices of the wicked, which is how they eat their food, and it's not good, their sacrifices. But you have that example of God not approving of sacrifices and not requiring it, and everything. And then as far as praising the Lord, though, and the implication of praising the Lord on the instruments, you have in Psalms 33:2, praise the Lord with the harp and sing with the psaltery. So he says sing with the psaltery in the Psalms, and these are commanded to sing from the New Testament. I'm going to go over those verses. I will open my dark sayings on a harp. And so he wrote these on a harp. I will praise thee with the psaltery, I will sing with the harp. Here it says sing with the harp. 71:22. And then upon the instruments of 10 strings and the psaltery and upon the harp, they make a solemn sound. And so God is pleased with the solemn sound of the music, and he wouldn't change. This theology makes it that God changes his mind. And I want to get into that because they believe God changed his mind on you could have your kin, and then he changed his mind in Leviticus. But he called their name Adam, and there were multiple Adams. I go over a YouTube and that you can look up. He called their name Adam, and I come up discussing that God always wanted us to not have our kin, just like he always wanted us to use the instrument. It's a solemn sound, and he enjoys that. And so he commanded us to sing psalms, because in the psalms you have all these commandments. Let me show you. Sing upon sing to the Lord with the harp, and with the harp sing the voice of psalms. Now this is where it's commanded in 98 verse 5 to sing the psalms with harps, with the music. Okay, so notice this point, that you must sing the psalms with harps. That's a commandment. So in the New Testament, when it says sing psalms, it means on the harp, because that's the commandment to sing them here in 98 verse 5. And then the other ones that GBN mentions, there's a couple that says sing praises with the harps and the organs and the sounding cymbals and the psaltery and harp, and 150. Those, they mention those on GBN. But they don't consider those commandments, even though it is commandments. And so the fruit of our lips is brought up. And the fruit of our lips, they want you to think it's singing, but it says it's to do good and to communicate. Now that's to others. Do good to others and communicate to others. That is the fruit of our lips. Not singing to God without a communication going on and the good works. Just the singing is the fruit of our lips. That's not the answer, because this is two things: to do good and to communicate. And that's a two-way communication. Singing is a one-way communication. Now there are examples of singing. Acts 16:25, they were in jail. It's the only two examples of singing in the New Testament. The other one in Matthew 26:30, they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. So they weren't assembled like in a building, but they sang a hymn and they went out. So they weren't with organs and instruments. And it says they sang a hymn. And so the only example you have is they sang a hymn. Well, now I've showed you the commandments to sing the psalms with harps. And there are instrumental melodies in spiritual songs. Have to have melody. Songs do. But hymns do not have to have melody. And so that is my debunking of the hymns that they sang. And so you can't say they sang hymns and so we got to sing everything we sing without instruments, and that means it's commanded to sing a cappella. You can't do that, because hymns are a cappella. Hymns are. But it's commanded to sing the psalms, and they're not a cappella. They were written with a harp. And I showed you those commands. So real quick, Colossians 2:23 is before this singing verse, and it says will worship. Well, in that context, in verse 8, it's philosophy and vain deceit. That is the will worship, and traditions of men, not of God. And see, God had commanded the instruments, and David makes it clear that we are to do so. And the rudiments of the world, not of the believers or of God, but the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. So that's what will worship is, which it goes into things that are not dealing with this. It's things of men, not of God, and of the world, is the will worship. And so I wanted to cover that because they try to take will worship and say it's self worship, and it means that and so they use these transliterations and things that I'm going to get into. Um, and so Colossians 3:16 then is where it says sing the psalms, hymns, spiritual songs. But Ephesians 5:18 and 21 is clearly commands you not to be drunk with wine where is an excess, but be filled with the Spirit. And then it says speaking to yourself in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, making melody in your heart. And that's what I was talking about. The previous melodies came on instruments, so we have to have that melody from the instruments to even make it in our hearts. And then the command to sing psalms is the command to use instruments to sing those. But the hymns, the hymns are a cappella, the writing of the songs. But this is a command not to drink wine wherein is excess, but be filled with the Spirit. Those are commands that we take literal. So they do not take the command of singing psalms or spiritual songs, only the hymns and making melody in their heart. So the churches are not fully taking this information that use a cappella. They're not taking the psalms because they're commanded. They're not singing the psalms that way because they would have to eliminate these commandments that I'm going to read to you. That I read to you. Giving thanks to God for all things. And then they had brought up Cain because Cain, it says, "Thou do it if thou doest well," and they say that implies he knew. Well, he didn't know because Adam didn't offer offerings, and he was a tiller of the ground, so he brought the first fruits of the ground. It wasn't that he knew, but where he didn't do well is he was growing the tree of knowledge of good and evil that gave you the knowledge of fornication. That's where he wasn't doing so well, that he was really getting that knowledge out there. And God's disrespect for his offering possibly could have been that he blew it or something, because he showed disrespect for his offering. So something that it got blown, or rain, or water got on it, or something, or lightning, anything could have happened to his offering that caused his countenance to fall because of what happened to his offering. I had to cover that about Cain, because they talk about him, but they don't mention that he was a tiller of the ground and brought of those first fruits. They mentioned that he sort of was supposed to know he was supposed to bring an offering. That's not true. He was just bringing what was best, but where he did not do well was of the fornication. Now, John 2:9 is studied on Garland Elkins and Aaron Gallagher's. They study this, and I want to go over it with you because Garland Elkins quotes the chapter from verse 9, "Whosoever transgresseth and abideth not in the gospel of Christ hath not God," and he keeps reading, it expresses it more, but the gospel of Christ is mentioned the verses before that in 5 and 6. And they do not read that gospel of Christ. They don't want you to know that it is what it is. But it's a new commandment, and it's a commandment, okay? Because transgression means breaking the law. So whosoever transgressed, that means breaking the law or going contrary to the law. And these men, they have changed that word. Aaron Gallagher says it just means progressive, which means if you do anything positive, you're going to get reprimanded by the church because you're being progressive. Because progressive means to improve to completion. And so that word does not work there because this is a violation of the law. And the law here is in verse 5 and 6, where he says his commandment is to love one another and you should walk in it. And it reverberates it in verse 6 that his commandment is the new commandment to love one another. So when you violate that, that is violating the gospel of Christ. Not little things that you can find about worship or this and that, and saying it's progressing in a way that's not what Jesus did, and so therefore you're sinning. That's not what this text is. You're violating the law, which is the new commandment, and so that's what the context of this is. And so I had to have you know that, and that not only they change the word transgress to progressive, but they take the word unseen, talking about God's words that caused the angels to create things by command out of stuff, and they put the word invisible, so that you have to believe that the original language means that it was absolutely nothing God made stuff out of. And then also they put the word skinned about Adam and Eve getting clothes, so that you think that God skinned animals when they had clothes, and he also had done it for the other animals. That's implied that he had done it before. He didn't skin animals to give other animals hair. And so I have a whole video on that. You can look up, he called their name Adam, and it's in there with that, along with the other information that's about having your kin. And so we can't do continued righteousness like the Catholics preach, or they have in their catechism, continued righteousness of the saints. And so you can't have that with the word progressive, and these other words that these transliterations put in there. They are adding to the Bible, and the Church of Christ is just gladly taking it because they know it teaches the theories, which are theories, better, and so they teach the theories with it better, and they just say it's better to teach the theories with. And so now that brings me to my last scripture I think I have on this, Revelations 18, and it's Babylon shall be thrown down, with violence shall Babylon be thrown down, and shall not be found anymore. And so the voice of harpers, musicians, pipers, trumpets shall not be found no more at all in thee, Babylon. Okay, so the voices of the musicians, and they have stopped now because of this virus. You can't go to shows or hear performances even in churches, so the voices of these have stopped. But this is a prophecy. But also remember in 1 Corinthians 15:52 that there's a last trump. So God has a trump, and there is a last trump. There is an instrument that comes after this silencing of instruments, and it doesn't mean that these instruments aren't played in private. It just means that there's no public assembly of these instruments anymore in Babylon, which that has come to fruition. And so I think I covered most everything because I've written all this down trying to remember it. And so I hope this is a good video, and you can thumbs up and understand that I've covered all this information from the standpoint that of the truth and the true perspective on instruments, and how they always existed, and we would need a prohibition on them, just like we have on the sacrifices, if they were to be prohibited. So carry on and play on, and have a good day.